Today is May 25th, Saturday, 2024. Well, first, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, cool.
It's a lot of background noise, but I guess you could filter that out.
Okay, sounds good. My name is Donovan Carter with the Salmon Proctor Oral History Program, and I'm joined by
Bennett, Carroll.
And today, we have the honor of speaking with the incredible, can you state your name?
My name is Dinizulu Tinnie.
Okay.
And I'll spell it as DINIZULUGENETINNIE.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Tinnie. We really appreciate your time.
Sorry?
I said thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your time here.
My pleasure.
Can you tell us about where you're from?
Currently, I live in Miami, Florida.
Okay.
But originally a New Yorker.
Okay, cool.
And Long Islander.
Long Island, all right. And what brings you up to Apalachicola today?
What brings us here today is the opportunity to visit, celebrate, commemorate, and otherwise honor the memory of the Negro Fort. It's a place I've known about for decades. I've been to around Florida. I've been to Tallahassee more times than I can count, which is not that far away, but never had the opportunity to actually be here. So I wasn't sure. My wife, Dr. Wallace Tinnie, is much more intimately involved with the project, the issue, and so forth. But I didn't really know what the program was going to be. I was very pleasantly surprised to find that it was as educational as it was. I mean, on so many levels. I mean, from cerebral to visceral,
Yes.
you know? So I am so glad that I came and I got to meet you guys.
Could you talk a little bit more about that experience? Maybe did you have a certain expectation before you came, or?
You know, I didn't really know what to expect before coming, because I knew that the fort itself, there was nothing that really remained of it. There were no ruins, there were no, and I'll just kind of interject, maybe about a month ago, a little more, we visited Fort Pillow in Tennessee, Western Tennessee. And that, if those who are not familiar, I mean, that was the site of probably the worst atrocity that was committed during the Civil War. Basically a massacre of Union troops who were mostly African Americans. And I guess I could also add that, you know, I work with a number of historic preservation projects. So I believe that it's really accurate to say that whereas maybe in previous decades or centuries, it was maybe considered adequate for museums to become like large boxes that collected artifacts and so forth. I think we're at another point in time where there's really no substitute for being in the place where the history was made. Walking in the footsteps of ancestors, so to speak, and literally. And the Fort Pillow experience, it's a state park. A lot of the challenges that face historic sites are present there, not least that the Mississippi River itself has, on its own by natural forces, migrated to like a quarter mile west of where the incidents of 1864 took place. But it's still extremely important to acknowledge and revere these places that were consecrated by struggle. So I use that as a backdrop and a context for, that's what gave me a real appreciation for being here. It was, some people would say it was hot. It was, kind of a long walk. But in the heat, as we walked, I put myself in the position of the people who were here. They faced nothing less and a whole lot more. And, a very interesting conversation came up during the tour where our two guides, one from the National Forest, one from the National Park, were sharing the fact that the Negro Fort story has been told many times, many ways, mostly in ways that totally overlook and eliminate the agency of the African descendant people who were there. It was a fort that the British built and handed over to the African Americans, or their native allies did this, that, and their point was that there should be at least 3 flags that fly over the fort, one being British, one being United States, and one being the flag of the Negro Fort when it was the Negro Fort. Well, that raised another question. Well, what flag would that have been? What did it look like? And I have to say, as over the years I've read the story from several sources, obviously the best known, the most spectacular aspect of the whole story is the explosion of the powder magazine. But the fact that they flew a red flag, there are yellow flags for quarantine, there are white flags for surrender. The red flag that just said no quarter, we're not taking prisoners, we will not be taken prisoner. This is it. That aspect of how can I put it? There are so many aspects of the story that need to be brought to light that really help to flesh it out and to give it more context, give it more power. But as just kind of an iconic symbol of what that came down to, I think that red flag is we use red flag in another context these days, and I guess it's in there too. It's like a reminder that we really do need to be conscious. I think another valuable point that came out was the fact that nothing about this story was neat and clean, cut and dried, predictable, and so forth. And I think the general conversation, in the general conversation, we shared that the reality, which, and it's fortuitous that this is happening Memorial Day weekend, so close to Emancipation Day in Florida, is that emancipation itself was that kind of thing. I think everybody who was there got a better appreciation of how uncertain, how unpredictable, how dangerous the situation surrounding everybody's life was at the time. I mean, Union troops show up, and now emancipation actually has a reality because there are troops to enforce it. But what did that mean? And so much came down to individual people having to make individual choices. Some people say, oh, well, some people preferred to go back to the plantations where they were enslaved. Well, I mean, from our perspective, somebody could say, oh, well, that was kind of unenlightened behavior, but who knows what, family members and, elderly people what needed kids. I mean, there are all kinds of factors that people had to process literally in the moment. And I think that raising the red flag was one of those. That, I mean, in the heat of battle, seeing that this is what our options are. I just bend your ear with a story that almost seems not related, but you'll see what I mean. In the Virgin Islands, which before they became U.S. were Danish, that was Denmark's attempt at slavery in the Western Hemisphere. On one of the islands, there was a rebellion. The enslaved people, set fire to one plantation after another. The slaveholders were able to escape the island, get to one of the French islands, get the assistance of the French Navy and so forth, and they could come in to quell this rebellion. And the people, the enslaved people, seeing what their situation was, knowing what the punishments were for if you rebelled or escaped, they gathered at the highest point on the island and on a cliff overlooking the sea, and knowing what was to come, everybody linked arms and leaped. How many of us can even imagine what that is to have to make a choice like that? And it wasn't, I mean, the history of enslavement is, it's filled with stories like that, only a few of which we know, Ebo Landing and some others. But Prospect Bluff joins that repertoire. So being able to be here, kind of be in that space, surrounded by poles that sort of define where the central structure of the fort was, where the powder magazine would have been, where the crater would have been that was created by the explosion, and all of the narratives that we read, mostly from military people, from spectators, if you will. I mean, you heard everything from people seeing body parts being, and recognizing them as being children, women. Some of the history books that say a lucky shot from Lucky. Wow. Where are we? I mean, what planet are we on that you even think that is, acceptable to say? You hear stories that even among the soldiers, the people, there were, people just tears in their eyes. They couldn't imagine that they would be part of something as devastating as that. So there's a lot of human history embedded in the story, and I think what I'm giving thanks for, and I guess first on the list is my wife, who got me to come on up here, is to have been able to come and connect physically with that story. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I think something that I experienced that lasted with me is that physicality of like shared space. What kind of my question then turns into is, you're celebrating this space, but it's also, this is a specific moment in history. And even as we oral historians are coming to engage with it and the community is celebrating it over Memorial Day weekend, where the narrative is back in the hands of the people who experienced it. What does that mean for you, just as on an individual level, just with your care of history, to have the narrative placed in your hands?
As they say, an excellent question. Because it is so necessary to decolonize the language, the very language. I mean, just the vocabulary, the syntax that we've just been socialized into using, and to take that to the next step, which is what you said, to report some of the history from the perspective of the person. You know, when a crime is committed, the perpetrator has all kinds of excuses and defenses. The story that matters is the person who suffered the violation, and how does this person reclaim, one's life. So on that level, there's much to be appreciated just in what is coming to light, what is coming forward. Some of us are old enough to remember that only a couple of decades ago we were frantically searching for scattered fragments of history and hoping like in some kind of ancient pictorial vase that you'll find pieces that'll come together and tell the story that was scattered and shattered. But even then we were predicting, if we're successful at this, we will find ourselves probably where we are now. So much is coming to light. Now the struggle is to even keep up with all of it and not miss out. The other part of your observation, I think that is such an important key, and I'm so glad you brought it up. And that's this kind of distinction at the same time as conjunction of celebration and commemoration. What happened at Prospect Bluff, Fort Negro, the story we know best is hardly one that one could call a cause for celebration. However, much as we've pointed out many times in our work with the Loxahatchee battlefield in Palm Beach County, Florida, which was really a turning point in that decades-long assault on freedom and prosperity known as the Seminole Wars, plural in the government records, singular, the memory of the people who were attacked. What we point out is any one of these battles, the Dade Massacre, the Battle of Okeechobee, the Loxahatchee, the two battles, these battles might have lasted a matter of hours, days at the most. What about the Seminole Peace? What about the generations of people creatively, intelligently interacting with their environment, interacting with each other? It was an eye-opener to learn today that, excuse me, that 50 miles upriver from the fort, there were all these settlements, Native and African-American settlements. And I think it was Bill Steele, the architect, who pointed out that, you go back to a mid-1800s Webster's Dictionary, and plantation was defined in a completely different way. I mean, nowadays, we say, well, that's a euphemism for a forced labor camp. Well, it was actually a system, an agricultural system that can trace its roots back to, the African motherland and places like Haiti. I mean, it's still, alive. So the idea that you had folks who survived the Middle Passage, the Atlantic crossing, you had people who were here even before that, who not African people, you had indigenous black people, to use our current, parlance. We see how places like this fort bring to light such a more complete, more enlightening understanding of human history in general, American history in particular. And for gifts like that, I'm glad we made the drive.
It's amazing. One last question I want to ask you is, as you said, you learned about Negro Fort today, and you've learned about Prospect Bluff and the history here. How do you want to continue carrying this history forward? How do you want to make sure that maybe the next generation of people knows that this happened?
I think there's a twofold answer to that. I think the more obvious side is that as every bit of this knowledge that is coming to light, every artifact that comes to light, every insight that we gain, we need to record it and put it in some kind of accessible repository, whether it's, acid-free paper archives or digital or, whatever, so that this is, the knowledge kept. I think the other side of it is a little more challenging and maybe, I dare say, more necessary. And that is, we have to implement a healthy alternative to the paradigm, the language, even the conceptualization of history that comes out of the colonizing narrative. Even beyond colonization, we're dealing with an interesting juxtaposition here. We're dealing with a human tradition that can be found all over the planet, where we understand that we're part of a single universe. There are no alternatives. There's, everything that happens in the universe stays here. Lying, denying, forgetting, ignoring, it's here. The memory of everything that happens is, it's in the rocks, it's in the winds, it's in the waters. That's how it is. We're all made of stardust. There are no aliens. There's no us. There's no them. Everything is just we. Okay, that is a paradigm that you can go almost anywhere in the world, particularly among traditional and so-called primitive people, and that's just understood. Then you have this other narrative of, we know that there are no aliens in the universe, but then you have folk who act as if they were alien, as if this were some planet for their taking, not something they're part of. This is something, this is a resource to be exploited, managed, controlled, directed. If it can't be a resource that's exploited or a nuisance to be removed, then it's a threat to be eliminated. Where we come from, that's called psychopathology. And yet that is the driving, concept of, what's come to be called, Western civilization and science, which is not to deny all of the wisdom that Western science and, civilization has brought in terms of understandings of things that, if we had the intelligence to use them right, could, just simply enhance our lives. So, the answer to your question is, yes, let's gather all the scattered fragments we can find. Let's put together as many as we can. Let's interpret these things. Let's present them in a way that future generations do not just inherit them as a burden, but as a legacy, an asset, But at the same time, we have to be aware that the fight we have, it's not against people. It's not against, the world would be a better place if those people weren't on it. We've seen that movie too many times. But it's against, shall we say, bad behavior. I mean, the Egyptian legend, the Osiris and the insanely jealous brother who murders and hacks. That's what that whole thing was a metaphor even back then. That we can either understand the oneness of life and find our place in it and celebrate being harmoniously there, appreciating that everybody is born in the time, the place that the universe required, with the physical and spiritual and mental traits that you have, and being about the business of, fulfilling and helping the next generation of children to fulfill that. Or we can get caught up in envy and jealousy and, well, why does that person have this and I don't? Or this has value because I have it and you don't. And it's a choice that we make individually and collectively.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Is there anything else you want to say before we end the interview?
I was a lot more long-winded than I thought I would be, but I think you probably want to hear from some folk who really have some knowledge.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for the invitation, and this is this just adds to the blessing of being here. Thank you.